For Agrippina, every report from Rome seemed to carry nothing but bad news. First, she had learned of the deaths of her grandfather, Caesar Augustus, her mother Julia, and her only remaining brother, Postumus Agrippa. The Senate had then conferred the title of Imperator on her stepfather, Tiberius. And somehow, no one questioned the sequence of events surrounding her divine grandfather's death. After a journey to bid farewell to Tiberius, who was heading to Pannonia, Agrippina's grandfather fell ill and took to his bed at the family villa in Nola. Tiberius arrived a day or two later, and soon after that it was announced that her grandfather had died. But this announcement came only after the commander of the guard had murdered her brother, Postumus Agrippa, on the island of Planasia. Now, nearly 2 years later, the news from Rome remained grim. Her cousins, Lucius and Marcus Scribonius Libo, had been forced to commit suicide, following their trials for conspiracy against Tiberius. Additionally, Agrippina's grandmother, Scribonia Libo, a woman well into her 80s, had also passed away, having lost her lifelong war against Livia Drusilla. How many of her relatives had to die before Tiberius was satisfied? And still, no inquiry into the murder of her brother had been opened by the Senate, or by Tiberius. It was as if it never happened. Was it any wonder Agrippina preferred life with her husband's legions on the Rhine to the dangers of living in Rome, where Tiberius's spies could orchestrate a downfall similar to that of her mother and sister? Not that her life had been easy. Life with the legions was hard. After suffering a miscarriage during the mutiny's chaos, Agrippina soon found herself pregnant again. While her husband, Germanicus, marched into battle, conquered the Chatti, recovered one of Rome's lost eagles, and captured a high-value hostage, Agrippina stayed behind in the camp, ever the steadfast soldier's wife. "Take Caligula and go home," was the advice from her husband's soldiers and administrators. Each time Germanicus crossed the Rhine, there was the looming threat that the war could be brought right back to camp, endangering herself, her son, and her unborn child. But Agrippina, a descendant of the divine Caesar Augustus, reminded them of her lineage and resolutely declared that she would fulfill her duty, even in extremis, and remain by her husband's side. Soon after Germanicus returned to Ubiorum with the spoils of his successful campaign, Agrippina delivered her child. After giving birth to 5 boys, 2 of whom did not survive, Agrippina finally gave her husband a daughter. She was named Julia Agrippina, known as Agrippinilla. As her husband occupied himself with the building of ships and creating a strategy to defeat the armies of Arminius once and for all, Agrippina tended to her children and helped around the camp. Before long, she was carrying another child. Then, not long into the new year, more news arrived from her friends in Rome. It appeared that her murdered brother, Postumus Agrippa, had come back to life. At first, the reports circulated like wild rumours, whispered in the Senate's corners or among the bustling markets. Some claimed Postumus Agrippa had been seen on a remote island, hiding among sympathisers. Others swore they had glimpsed him in Rome itself, disguised as a commoner and plotting his return to power. For Agrippina, this news reopened old wounds, sending shockwaves through her mind. Could it be true? Had her brother somehow survived Tiberius's treachery and escaped Planasia? Or was this merely a phantom conjured by the Senate's endless intrigue and her own grief? Each report brought a flood of questions and dangers. If true, Postumus would be a direct threat to Tiberius's principate. Yet, even as a lie, the re-emergence of his name threatened to destabilize the Claudian hold on the empire. Either way, Agrippina knew that the news, whether of her brother's death or supposed survival, could bring unpredictable consequences for her and for her family. According to these reports, Agrippina's brother, who may have escaped Planasia by assuming a slave's identity, initially fled to Gaul. There he met secretly with supporters and spent the next year amassing a following substantial enough to challenge Italy. As news of his intentions to march on Rome spread, the people of the city grew increasingly excited. They hoped that a blood descendant of Caesar Augustus would finally reclaim his rightful place at the head of the empire. But subsequent reports revealed the grim outcome for Agrippina's brother. Tiberius, displeased with the public's enthusiasm for this prodigal son, dispatched the centurion Gaius Sallustius Crispus and his men under false pretenses, with promises of military support against Tiberius. Crispus, who had served Agrippina's grandfather and had announced Postumus Agrippa's murder to Tiberius and Livia at Nola, had been momentarily suspected of the murder himself, but the matter was never investigated. When Crispus and his men finally breached the inner circle surrounding Postumus, they seized him by force and dragged him back to Rome. There, he was tortured on Tiberius's orders, who then personally interrogated him. The man was Vipsanius Clemens, a freedman of Postumus who had served him during his exile on the island of Planasia. Clemens, possessing a similar build to Postumus, had seized the opportunity to escape by donning his late patron's clothes. After growing his hair and beard to match those of an escaped prisoner, he made his way to Gaul, where he began building his support. When Tiberius confronted Clemens, he asked, "How is it that you came to be Postumus Agrippa?" Clemens met Tiberius's gaze steadily and replied, "The same way you came to be Caesar." Although Vipsanius Clemens was executed by Crispus, many in Rome whispered that the story of an impostor was a lie. Some claimed that Gaius Sallustius Crispus had actually murdered Postumus Agrippa, concealing the truth of his escape from Planasia behind a facade of lies. By autumn of the same year, Agrippina, heavily pregnant, moved to the military camp at Koblenz, where she anticipated the return of Germanicus and his legions. That spring, her husband had transported 50,000 men via ship into Germania's interior, with plans to finish off the armies of Arminius. But it was now mid-September, and there was still no sign of Germanicus's return. Word had reached her that a great battle had taken place along the Weser River, at a location known as Idistavisus. Germanicus had claimed the valley, while Arminius had positioned his forces in the surrounding forests, hoping to claim another victory modelled after his success in the Teutoburg forest. But Agrippina's husband had spent the winter studying that battle and was ready for Arminius. According to the reports, Germanicus placed his infantry in the centre and his cavalry on the flanks. There would be no surprise ambush this time. The fighting was reported to be brutal, and though he was not slain, Arminius was injured severely enough to flee the battlefield. The Roman legions, under the command of her husband, had won a great victory, finally breaking the allied armies of the Germanic tribes, whose survivors also fled. Germanicus then took the time to bury the Roman dead with the appropriate honours before beginning the journey back to Koblenz. So, where was he? Then, word arrived that a large number of Germanicus's fleet had been shipwrecked due to an unexpected storm. At this news, his staff at Koblenz began to fear. Scattered in various locations, forced to find their way back on foot, Germanicus's disorganized forces were now vulnerable to retaliation from the Germanic tribes who had fled. With no knowledge of the whereabouts of Germanicus and his men, the camp at Koblenz was suddenly in the gravest of danger. The tribes could instead attack them, simply by crossing the bridge that connected the camp to the opposite side of the Rhine. With Germanicus's return so delayed, the staff began making plans to destroy the bridge for the safety of the men within the camp. But to destroy the bridge was also to leave Agrippina's husband and all his men to die at the hands of vengeful tribesmen. Despite the pleas of Germanicus's staff, Agrippina announced that if they wished to destroy the bridge, they should do so with her on it. She then marched across the bridge and sat down on the other side of the Rhine to await the return of her husband. With the granddaughter of the divine Caesar Augustus stationed on the opposite side of the Rhine, the military architects hesitated to dismantle the bridge. Eventually, Germanicus and his men began to emerge from the forests, slowly making their way back to the safety of Koblenz. Upon seeing them, Agrippina quickly crossed the bridge to rejoin the camp, where she took up a position alongside the supplies. As the weary and exhausted soldiers arrived, Agrippina distributed blankets, food and drink, all while offering her heartfelt thanks for their service. Soon after being reunited with Germanicus, Agrippina again went into labour, where she delivered a second daughter, Julia Drusilla. With sons Drusus, Nero and Caligula, and daughters Agrippinilla and Drusilla, the dynasty of Germanicus, the future emperor of Rome, was secure. Then another dispatch arrived from Rome. But this one was not for Agrippina, it was for Germanicus. The dispatch was from Tiberius Caesar himself. Germanicus and his family were officially ordered to return to Rome.